I have been at Atlassian. I was at ThoughtWorks. I've been at Atlassian for about a year and a half, working on the OnDemand service offering. It's our hosted offering, and that comes with a lot of challenges with software that has been built for the last 10 years for download and running on vertically scaled servers. So part of the appeal for OnDemand is getting new releases quickly, and we made a decision to change the way we delivered software so that we could get new features into users' hands quickly. And this is a story of that journey so far anyway. So who here has used or knows of Confluence or JIRA? Excellent. And we have the developer tools as well. You may have heard of Stash. It's a new tool for DVCS management behind the firewall. And Bitbucket is the hosted version, or the hosted service. I'll just let you know how to pronounce these. Atlassian, it's not Atlassian, it's Atlassian, and it's JIRA. JIRA is from the Japanese Gojira, which is Godzilla, which is like Bugzilla, we took over. So that's the origin of that name. There are lots and lots of installs of our software running around the world. I'm being conservative at saying there's 125,000 installations running right now of our software. It's many more than that, but it's hard to count. In the hosted area, I know exactly how many there are. There's just over 18,000 now. That's 18,000 customer instances, and that's between 1 and 5 of the products running for each of those. So again, it's in the 100,000 plus applications running right now in OnDemand. So this story started maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Back then we were delivering software once a year, sometimes up to 3 if there was a major feature that needed to be put out there, but delivering roughly once or twice a year for the applications. So that's pretty slow. And then we decided, let's go to a 98-day release cycle. So there's a big push to change the way we worked, to go to a 98-day release so that we could get features out more often. But again, that was still quite heavyweight and definitely slow. Delivering the products to JIRA Studio, as it was called at the time, the hosted offering, was monthly. Now, it wasn't every product every month. It was roughly one of the products got delivered to Studio and packaged up and re-delivered in the hosted offering. But then, when I joined, we decided let's go to weekly releases to OnDemand, and that was just crazy talk. But that's part of the appeal of having a SaaS service, is to be able to get rapidly deliver features. So we started changing process and the tooling, but we found that wasn't the only thing. There are a lot of problems. I also wanted to deliver intra-daily, but that's the next part of the story. What we had was this. We had this massive engineering team building all those products and doing their iterative cycles, but still only towards the end, when they were about to launch, they started talking to marketing people and updating the documentation, and then they delivered it to the OnDemand team and said, here you go, here's the new version of the product. And then the OnDemand team would open it up and make the changes necessary to integrate in the OnDemand situation and deliver it. And sometimes that was months after the main release of the product. So that wasn't acceptable at all. So not only was it irregular, it was also quite late after, so OnDemand users were getting the features much later than if you had downloaded it. What we wanted was more like this, delivering at each of those iteration points to OnDemand, have features there. So we set about changing that. What did we have to go through first? There were some problems. Long build times. It took over 4 hours to build JIRA and Confluence just for the OnDemand pipeline. So just the functional tests to say, is this version of the product working in the OnDemand context, over 4 hours. And that was on top of many other hours of functional tests the download products would go through. Yeah, we got different constraints in OnDemand. We know what hardware we're running on, we know what operating system we're running on, we know what database we're using, so it's a little bit easier to test for OnDemand. We don't have all the different variations, but it's still quite a lengthy process. Lots of debt in the build process had built up over those 10 years, making it a lot of assumptions in there. It took about 3 months to get a full green board. You know, you see your wall boards and there's a couple of things that are red, and sometimes there's always one thing red somewhere around there. So we decided we didn't want that. We absolutely wanted green everywhere, a full green board. So it took many months of diligent work to get that happening. And any flaky test, sometimes you've got these weird tests that there's an odd dependency somewhere in the pipeline and it will fail for no particular reason. In a 4-hour build, that is really annoying, because when that happens, you've got to go right back to the start and try it again. And then a different flaky test fails. So you can imagine the inefficiencies that come with that. We also had a growing team. You know, that big team of engineers has doubled in the last year or so, and the tooling, particularly things like SVN, were holding us back. We had all these multiple work streams going and adding features to the products, and things like SVN were holding us back. Shipping to OnDemand, that weekly delivery, a downstream team was having to open up the product and put it back together. It was an immense amount of work to do that every week. Not every product was changing every week, but a lot of them were, and that took a lot of time and effort, and trying to fit that into a weekly cycle is quite a challenge. Has anyone done the Dragon Slayer challenge? It's a document. It's in the documentation. It's a quest for integrating Atlassian applications, and that can take a day or two to complete the first time you do it. And we have to do that every week. So something that takes that much effort had to change. There's a rise of some of the plugins to almost products themselves. So anyone uses Greenhopper, you know, that's a plugin on top of JIRA, but it's almost a product in its own right. And they make changes very rapidly. They use a Kanban development approach, so their features are updating all the time, and they were held back because the application they host in, JIRA, was delivering at a different pace. And we wanted to be able to have them be able to deliver independently of that hosted product. And they deliver completely different features to JIRA, and for them to be able to do that all by themselves. And any little cross-product dependencies, there's a lot of them, but any of those create a hellish synchronization battle to try and get everybody up to the right version into a compatible range and then deliver that all at the same time. Not good for the challenge we had. And you know, we're doing this to an online environment as well as for download, so people can download the products at the same time. The backlog was driven for the last decade from the download customers. That's where most of the users come from, and developers would wait many months to get feedback from users as to what they needed to change for the next release. Products developers also think about their problems, and if you hear for Sam's talk, it's a lot of great advice there. The product developers think about their problems in the context of a single instance, just JIRA running or just Confluence running, one server. Add more RAM, that'll solve the problem. Of course, in a hosted environment, RAM is the most expensive resource we have, and there isn't that much of it, so adding more RAM is not a solution. They also think about things in terms of a single instance when it comes to upgrade tasks or making a change that migrates the data. Well, when you've got 18,000 of them running at the same time and doing it roughly at the same time, getting upgraded roughly at the same time, there's a change in mindset required there as well. So I've got 40 to 90,000 applications running at the same time. And if they're all doing an upgrade task, there's a lot of I/O going on, there's a lot of RAM being used, a lot of CPU being burnt. So the problem with driving the backlog from download customers was that we weren't thinking about the impact to on-demand and the continuous delivery issues that we had there. So what were some of the things we did to solve it? People. We changed our minds about how we would think about the source code and always having an runnable system culture where everything I check in is runnable. If it's deployable from master. So when we keep, instead of the old mentality and subversion where where the trunk was well ahead of everything, but there was a lot of junk in the trunk. We changed that idea to say, a pristine master is what we need, because at any point, whatever's in master could be taken and deployed into on-demand, into production. We also improved the regularity of the download artifacts to every 2 weeks. So there's milestones every 2 weeks, which is great if you're in the ecosystem of plug-in developers, or you're a corporate that relies on the products and have your own plugins that you've written. You can keep up to date with the changes as they're happening and be more ready for the big release when it happens. Confluence also has this capability actually of doing a seamless upgrade. So they're able to change the software such that you can have two Confluences running at the same time. Again, from Sam's talk, there was some advice there about how to do that. And so we can have two Confluences running at the same time. One is the old version, one is the new version. And be able to have a seamless changeover to the new version, so the users don't actually experience anything in terms of an outage. We're not using that in on-demand because it requires two Confluences running at once, but soon enough we will be able to do that. Also, the integration architecture, the products weren't really built to work with each other, but humans seem to like to use them together in the same overall workflow. So we're pulling apart the outsides of the products and putting them back together in a way that they can talk to each other in a more consistent fashion. And also the main point about that is that we decouple any dependencies between them, particularly things in the common modules in the Atlassian SDK. There's a lot of things in there that we've been able to pull apart and put back together in a way that means we can deploy the applications into on-demand independently and not have to have that synchronization of versions quite so bad. And the main thing, it was collaboration between the teams. So the engineering teams focus on their product, but now in the on-demand context and delivering to on-demand every week, they start thinking a lot more about what does this change do to impact the way I get this software out to the users next week. We use dog fooding, so we use our products ourselves to build our products, and that mentality shift has been quite amazing to watch, and the collaboration between the teams to get to a point where they can more easily work out the inter-product issues and get things out the door quicker it's a major change that's absolutely necessary if you're going to deliver your software regularly. We changed also, instead of shipping to on-demand some weeks or months after the main product release, we decided to start shipping to on-demand first. Again, a large cultural change. We started taking the backlog from on-demand because users have it there first now. We asked the product teams to take ownership of their products running on-demand. Previously, the on-demand team, a developer team of maybe 10 to 12 developers, they were the ones taking ownership of how the products operated in on-demand. But now in this new continuous delivery world, the devs in the product teams were taking responsibility for how their products ran in on-demand, as well as for download. So that pipeline changed from something that a downstream team was taking responsibility for to something where the developers upstream were taking responsibility for it. And they could see their change from the moment they made it through the moment it got into production live, within a week, they could see it the whole way along rather than throwing it over the wall for somebody else to deal with. Seems pretty obvious, but a good way to get software out the door continuously is to have a healthy pipeline. So a huge amount of time and effort went into fixing those tests and reducing the build times. We even built a product that we use internally called Hallelujah, which is it's a blessing. It shares artifacts and build queues across a number of agents, and we reduced the build times by 80% by have it automatically partitioning the tests for us, and any flaky test just gets put back on and another agent tries it, and if it succeeds, then that's fine. It doesn't spoil the whole build, and allows the developers to then focus on finding out why it was flaky, but they can still ship the software. So yeah, 80% reduction was quite useful. And then we have this idea of traffic management now. Some things are in the fast lane and some things are in the slow lane. So anything that is to do with keeping up that cadence and delivering continuously is in the fast lane. That's binary artifacts. That's things like the upstream and downstream builds that the developers are working on. Anything that's keeping that step of weekly delivery. And there's a slow lane where some features take quite a while to implement, like say the Confluence for the new editor took about a year of development to complete. So that obviously that wasn't being continuously delivered, but what we did was started looking at optional plugins and feature switches so we can turn things off. Sam mentioned dark launches, and we do that quite a lot. So OnDemand has a lot of the features dark. Sometimes we use them, we turn them on before the big launch, but a lot of the times they're dark, but they're sitting there inert, but working away, and the code coming off master is in production, even though it might be not actually working. So that also helps with marketing and any other teams around development that aren't necessarily needed to be part of that cadence of weekly delivery. They can work in this slow lane. Just helps us partition the work. There's a hell of a lot of monitoring and metrics coming out of OnDemand. We've got 18,000 customers. We've got roughly 90,000, 100,000 applications running at the same time. There's a lot of metrics. So by studying that activity, both in terms of the performance impact of a change and the user behavior changes, developers get that feedback a lot sooner now, and that makes them quite happy. The interesting thing with continuous delivery is it not only lets you make a change quickly, it lets you adapt quickly as well to that change, so which may mean making another change. And so that ability to be able to deliver every week for the product teams means they get that feedback and be able to adapt to it. Anyone heard of branch by abstraction before? So you've probably heard of feature branches or traditional branching in SVN, but branching by abstraction is an interesting software design technique where you have abstractions of ideas in the software and you design around it. And this basically allows us to have features that are available but may not be running, so those dark features, and we can switch them on and off. And what happens is the developers start by adding this idea or a change to an existing feature in the code and using it themselves. So it's like they alpha test it themselves, but it means nobody else is impacted by that. So the code can change, but the feature, the old feature or the feature the way it used to work still is there as well, and they can turn these switches on and off and try it for themselves, and then they sort of push it out to their team or to a few teams and beta test it by turning it on to one of the dog fooding servers that we have, and then more users internally get to use it, and then we end up deploying it for the whole company. So the company extranet and the company, the main issue tracker, we all get to use those features well before customers and provide feedback for our own developers because we get to use it ourselves. And then at some point, Now this may take days or weeks, but at some point we then launch it into OnDemand by turning the feature on. It could be an optional plugin as well. It may not be a feature switch. It may just be a plugin that is present or not present. So this, again, I think Sam was talking about trying out some of the features as you go, and maybe A/B testing. It's good for that too. But the main thing from a development point of view is I can still deliver the software off master anytime, whatever's on master. If I choose to, I can deliver it to production, and that's gives you a lot of confidence that things are going to be fine when you release it. Another interesting thing that OnDemand has are some shared services. So we've just launched a few of those. I got to write some Scala for the last year, which was fun. Part of the new architecture for OnDemand is looking at, I call it the 37 things that every web application does. Things like authentication and logging and messaging and notifications and all those things that every application does, apart from the thing that they're built to do. So we're taking them out and running them in a multi-tenanted or non-tenanted situation, so that we can decouple those sort of shared behavioral things from the actual core functionality that the applications have. And that gives us a lot of flexibility, because now we're not having these monolithic applications. We're having lots of services talking to each other, and they operate independently. They operate in a high availability and horizontally scaled way, and it means that the applications can be changed quite independently of the services around them. So that's really cool. That, along with the new integration architecture, helps us independently work with delivering applications and reduce the impact that any one small change has on the whole ecosystem. So we're using distributed computing principles, things we've learned about the last 20 years, and it also lets us decouple the operations of the applications. Previously with JIRA Studio, we'd have to restart all the applications, even if only one changed. That was just the way we bundled it up and delivered it to production. So quite wasteful on resources and annoying for users too. Now with these shared services, they've been built from the ground up as being able to be continuously deployed, so not even just continuously delivered, but deployed continuously as well. We deploy them multiple times a day. I can make a change now, commit it, and have it in production in 10 minutes without impacting any users. So that's a huge step forward in sort of the capability and mentality that goes into building software. So what were some lessons that we learnt along the way? I suppose the biggest lesson was, again, people. That was the biggest problem, and the biggest lesson was people. So it takes a while for people to change their mindsets, especially if they've been doing it a certain way for a decade. If we have a spectrum of people who believed continuous delivery has no value back when we started, and most people are at that end of the spectrum, to continuous delivery is obvious, why the hell wouldn't you do it? Now we've shifted most of the people to that, and really that's simply by just doing it. Oftentimes, until you see it yourself happening, you don't believe that it's worthwhile, and it takes a lot of effort to get there. So believing in that value is quite a stretch for some people. So don't be dismayed if most people don't agree if it's a good idea. There were some parts of the organization that are slower to adapt to that or create a formal process because of continuous delivery. The support teams had to adapt because they're impacted. We've got a legendary support team that respond really well to customers, and this change in the way software was delivered meant that they had to also change the way they thought about what's running now and what do I have to look after. Previously they were used to once or twice a year, having massive change, a big release, and having all this rather long list of things they had to update their knowledge on. And that's changed now to every week. Something small's there now, and there's a capability there now, or features changed slightly. And it's a small list, but lots of them over time. And the documentation team too, the way they communicate to customers and users what's changing, when it's going to change, what has changed, and be able to refer to documentation. The way they put that together had to change. Now they adapted quickly informally, but there were a lot of formal processes that you have when you're a large software organization, and those took a little while to change as well. And mostly that was just experimentation. Well, what if we do it like this? What works better for us? And that eventually happened, but that was a lesson that we had to learn that wasn't immediately apparent when we started on that journey. The other area that had to change was product management. So the people who think about the roadmaps for the products and take all the input from all the users that they talk to, they look at the industry and then see what's happening and directions and the sort of features or products that we should be building. And the way they thought about delivering products had to change radically, because they're used to a big marketing buzz, and that sort of doesn't happen when you're making little changes all the time. Anyone know the expression, good is greater than great? We spent probably a little bit too much time being conservative about our delivery process, and things like making that decision to change to Git from SVN. We spent and Mercurial for some of the teams. We spent a lot more time elapsed time than probably was warranted to make that decision. We knew we were going to do it, just quite conservative about getting there. We even, in terms of delivering from master, we even waited in Confluence for an extra month or two to make that decision. And in hindsight, that was a complete waste of time. Might as well have just done it. The build pipeline's never going to be perfect. Sometimes you just got to dive in and do it. And there's always something you're gonna have to tweak anyway, so don't try and get it perfect, just go for it and adapt. Yeah, lots of processes got impacted. A lot of implicit impact, but things like the distributable, the thing that we packaged together for OnDemand, that got changed. The way we put that together from this big monolithic, we call it a fireball. It's basically a massive zip file of all the applications put together in a particular way for OnDemand, with all the pre-integration points built and all the initial data put in there and ready to go. Change that into something that's decomposed and more in line with the actuality of the products, which is they're separate things, and even down to the component level, that the plugins are separate things. Tech writing, the way the document is put together, the documentation, the marketing teams, the support teams, customers and users, the way they respond to getting that software changing a little bit all the time, all impacted. Upstream, things like the OnDemand core, so the parts of OnDemand that are inbuilt in every product, so that when they get delivered to OnDemand, they know they're there. The platform, the SDK that Atlassian has, all the common modules, and user experience and design teams, they're all impacted by this new capability of being able to deliver regularly, and the way their thought process had to change about how they design and make changes to the user experience. So I've been at companies that flog continuous integration tools for the last, 7, 8 years. So continuous integration is something that is in my bloodstream. So of course I turn to those tools immediately for continuous deployment as well. And that's great, and Bamboo does a good job for us. The problem was the infrastructure that I was using was the same for continuous deployment, was the same infrastructure I was using for continuous integration. So those big, long builds that take hours or minutes, even 20 minutes is long enough for me. That was the same infrastructure I was using for deploying to production, which is crazy when you think about it. So a lesson I learned there was to split the infrastructure from the build and the deployment. So now we have dedicated infrastructure for doing continuous deployment, and that, my 17-second builds can run quite nicely and not get queued up and not get interfered with by long-running builds of compiling and testing in the continuous integration environment. We also, because we're Atlassian, we build lots of stuff ourselves, so we have a deployment engine that is triggered by all the Bamboo tasks, and its job is to coordinate each of those 18,000 and growing instances into being upgraded and what versions of the different software they're running. This may be something we package up and make available too. It'd be quite exciting, but it's just some extra capabilities at dealing with the sort of scale and number of applications that I have to work with running in production at the same time. This is not a problem that most of you have. But if you do have that problem, I'll be happy to talk to you about it. So that's where we got to. We have the nice iterative and incremental development processes happening in each team, and them deploying or delivering to OnDemand weekly. Each of them can do it independently of each other. Even Greenhopper is, as of next week, will be deploying completely independently of JIRA to OnDemand, which is great. It means if you're a Greenhopper lover, you'll see those features coming through thick and fast, because that's how the team develops them, thick and fast, and it'll be quite nice to be able to have them immediately in OnDemand. And as JIRA changes, it can change at a different pace. We're delivering to OnDemand first, sometimes dark features, sometimes the features aren't alive yet, but they're there and waiting. And then when the big launch comes along, you can get it as a download artifact if you run it yourself, or you can have it in OnDemand if you let me run it for you. Which is quite exciting. That's a massive change from a year and a half ago, from a company that was delivering at that point every 98 days to a company that's now delivering their products every week. And some of the things, like the shared services on OnDemand, are delivered multiple times a day. That's a big change, and so we've done a lot of hard work to get there. But we're still working on things, and the main thing, as always, is the pipeline. So the pipeline still tends to be fragile, and it's interesting. We know what the right thing to do is, but everyone has bad habits. I have bad habits, and there's good things you can do to goad people into not having those bad habits. So I get to wear a dunce cap every now and then if I break the build. The other thing is that I didn't mention was when any of those shared services get deployed into production, we have a canary test, and I get to write some RSpec and some Ruby like the good old days, and I have what I call post-deployment verifications. I think Sam called them smoke tests. And what that means is I deploy it into one of the areas. I've got 20 areas of infrastructure, but one of the areas has a canary instance, and I run my post-deployment verification tests. Take a couple of minutes. Basically, they're functional tests, the same sorts of functional tests as you might have in your acceptance test suite, but they're specifically, the goal is specifically to assure that the main parts of the application work as expected with the upgrade. And that also involves the things in the ecosystem that cannot be tested before production. And those include some of the external parties like Google. There's no sandboxing if you've got Google Apps. So you can log into OnDemand with your Google Apps credentials if you like, and we need to make sure that that full round-trip live production ecosystem is working. And so part of the pipeline includes that post-deployment verification. So we're investing in tooling. We're improving JIRA as an issue tracker to deal with continuous delivery because we're using it ourselves, so we need something that helps us with that. We're improving Bamboo and Stash, the DVCS, and Bitbucket to deal with continuous delivery. So all the triggers that happen when you commit, and the linkage and integration between, say, Bitbucket and Bamboo. So Bitbucket can tell Bamboo, hey, you've just made a commit, so go start building something, and then kick off the deployment pipeline as well. All getting improved. One of the big things that you find when you embark on a new software venture is you have all this code and you want to improve it. So there's, in OnDemand, we've got lots of shell scripts and Python scripts and Ruby scripts that need to be simplified. So part of what we're doing now is doing that, and we have a pretty reasonable configuration management database, because that's what drives all the installations and understands what's running in each of the instances. But things like Factor and Puppet to help declaratively describe what should be and tell us what is, and bring the two together. Instead of having a lot of scripts to do that, it's nice to have something that the industry has already built. So we'll be looking at things like that to help us simplify the way we upgrade and run the applications in OnDemand, and hopefully all those things, so all that investment in the tooling that we're doing, that'll obviously get passed on. So if you're a JIRA or Bamboo or Bitbucket or Stash user, you'll also have those continuous delivery improvements that we've been able to build in because we use it ourselves. Yeah, integration is something we're still working on. If you use multiple Atlassian products, you'll know that sometimes that's a challenge. They don't even look the same sometimes. The next release of all the products will have a harmonious UI and a harmonious user experience. So there's a lot of work going into integration capabilities, everything from the way you navigate between products and link them together to the way they talk to each other with various plugins. So you can connect the applications and have them provide information to each other. As a software developer, it's nice to be able to use that suite of tools and have them share information. So for us, that's helpful. Another problem with OnDemand is you can't run arbitrary plugins because I don't allow it. We have a very small set of plugins that we allow to be used because we're in a shared, constrained environment. Now with the next architecture of the plugin system, we'll be able to have remote plugins. So the plugins 3 will be local or remote. You can run them either way, and in OnDemand they'll be remote. And this all comes down to a bunch of distributed computing principles being applied. And so books like Jim Weber's book, Rest in Practice, gets used a lot for us to be able to make better APIs and have the applications talk to each other in a way that isn't tightly binding them, and allow us to deliver them independently. And that's a major plus. Wow. We're a big Maven shop. Who uses Maven? It's probably the single biggest impediment to continuous delivery that I know of from a software development point of view as a tool. Maven snapshots equals sad panda for continuous delivery. And versioning is an interesting thing. It's emotive for some people. But it often has to change in the face of continuous delivery. Everything from even the format that your version number takes may have to change. We're using some git describe and tag magic now to help us manage the versioning. So you'll start seeing some weird numbers appearing in your JIRA and Confluence versions and in OnDemand. And even the concept for us of what version of OnDemand is running is changing. It used to be, well, it's that monolithic thing we used to put together in a big ball, and that's that version, right? Now it's this version of the shared services, and it's this version of JIRA, and it's this version of Greenhopper, and it's this version of Confluence, and so on. So it's sort of an amalgam of version numbers now that we have to think about rather than a single entity. And that's fine, because that means we can deliver those products and those components independently of each other. Even the version numbering, like we're looking at things like, well, you'll get a JIRA 6.0, 6.0.3, but then there'll be this other number at the end, and that will be the release number, and that just will continue to monotonically increase, and you might go from 6.0.3.1000 to 6.1.0.1001, and those sort of numbers are actually separate. One thing is a marketing number and something for users to be able to understand what grouping of capabilities and features I'm using, and the other one is for us to know where that came from. And that's not necessarily, some people might have used the SVN revision number. Obviously with a DVCS you don't have that, so come out with new ways to deal with that, but effectively having to change the way we work with Maven and Maven deployment plugins, and just completely change the way we deal with versions in the POM files. And hopefully that sort of knowledge will be fed back to the community, and it won't be the terrible beast that it is. I don't use Maven. I use other tools, but the products use Maven. Documentation we're still working on. There's an effort underway now to get the information architecture of the documents to match the code structure, the coarse-grained code structure of the products, and maybe a little bit of both ways actually. So I get the code organization more matching more the way people think about the applications and use them. And we're doing that because when we make a change to some part of the application, it makes it much easier to identify which part of the documentation has to change. So that's good for everybody, and that's sort of work that's underway. And hopefully, as a user reading the documentation, it'll still make sense, and the structure will be well understood. That's because it's reflecting the way the code is structured, because hopefully that makes sense as well. But anyway, either way, it lets us quickly identify what has to change in the documentation when the software changes. Again, that's a continuous task now. It's not just something they can batch up and leave to once or twice a year. It's happening every week, and the tech writers sit with the devs and make changes to the documents as the code changes, which is fantastic. Data mining is something we're working on. With continuous delivery comes that rapid feedback that I don't know, it's just a richer experience, and you remember when you get the feedback, you remember what you did to make the feedback come about, because you only did it last week or a couple of weeks ago if it was a dark feature. So because of the feedback, and as a consequence of it and leading to it, where continuous delivery all feeds into that, and the data that OnDemand generates is huge, and we're learning better to find that data and add to it, and understand, well, where should I put raise events in the code so that I can understand the analytics, and also immediately see the impact on user behavior and the impact on performance in production, not just in testing. And it's again, the capability of continuous delivery allows us to do that. We wouldn't have done it otherwise. Marketing. I said before that each new release creates a buzz. We're pretty famous for our t-shirts, and you get t-shirts with every release, and there's some funny thing that happens every time there's a release, and that's a big deal, and marketing make it a big deal because it's fun, and users love to see all those new features. But in the face of continuous delivery, well, what happens there? And if OnDemand's getting those features and we're turning them on progressively, how does that change? And so the product management teams and the marketing area are starting to think about how can we not only cope with that, but how can we actually turn it into an advantage and something we can explore possibilities around. So there'll be some, I'm sort of a little bit scared because it means it'll come on me to make it happen, but it's going to be interesting to see how product marketing changes as well, and with continuous delivery underway. And the biggest I've left the biggest problem to last. It's a major issue at Atlassian, and it has a deep and binding. It's a deep and binding force on the way we we live every day. It's when do we have release parties? When do we get out to go drinking? What do we do with continuous delivery with release parties? Anyone got an idea of what I should do about release parties when I'm delivering every week?
Party continuously.
Yes, exactly. We're going to party all the time. Well, that's it. I hope you've got to see some of the challenges that a large software organization delivering for download customers and to a SaaS environment have. Not everybody has those challenges. We're pretty unique like that, but hopefully you can see that it can be done. And if you're in a situation where you only have some of those constraints, that hopefully it's a lot easier for you. And if you use our tools to build your own tools, then you'll see those new features coming through that enable you to perform continuous delivery a little bit better and track it. Anyone know what my Twitter handle means? Any Latin speakers here? I'll leave that as an exercise for you. Any questions? Because we've got about 2 minutes. Yeah, so the question was, how do we tie all the tests together for any given component, all the unit tests and functional tests? So previously, the downstream team would look after that. I mean, this is in the split from, are you talking about in the split from on-demand to download or just in general? Yes, we have unit tests running all the time. The functional tests for our products are pretty laborious because we've got to test across different databases. Previously, we used to have to test across different app servers, and we still test across different browsers. So the same functional test scenario is running dozens of times. So it just takes a long time. But for on-demand, we don't have to worry about all of those, but they do have to worry about running the integration tests where there's things tying the products together in on-demand. So there is a separate pipeline for delivering to on-demand that's part of the overall pipeline, but it's different to each of the different ones. Now, Bamboo just runs all those tests for us. We have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of plans dealing with that. The plans look at different segments of the tests. As I said, they run the same test multiple times depending on the target infrastructure, and there's a lot of wallboards, and if any of them are red, then any one square is red, then that means there's a problem, obviously, but nowadays it means we can't deliver if any of those are red, so that's why they keep them green. Each team takes on the responsibility for building those tests and keeping them green. We do have QA engineers as well, but they're not responsible for keeping the tests green. They have much more valuable responsibilities, like ensuring that what we're testing is the right thing, and that we've thought about all the possible things that could go wrong. And now, on-demand team still does some of its own tests. As I say, the post-deployment verification is an example of that. But that's like a last gate of automation before we release the beast into production. It's always changing too. The way we approach testing and when and what gets tested changes all the time. So it's probably a hard one to answer because each week something's different. The question was about the feedback loop and all that information coming in. So we're still trying to deal with that. Previously, when you release once or twice a year or even every few months, you have these batches of time where you expect, well, we're going to get a whole bunch of feedback and we just got to trawl through that. Our users are pretty cool, actually, with the way they give feedback, and they're very generous with lots of information about either a feature they would like or something that's gone wrong, and a great community around it. So we have an answers wiki now where actually the community answers each other's questions, which is fantastic, and we obviously contribute that as well. But really it is a data mining and prioritizing exercise. There's feedback that comes back not just from users now, but all the production infrastructure, all the monitoring systems that we have. Different teams focus on different things. The support teams focus on things that actually impact the user's ability to use the software. The operations teams look more at the performance and the impact on infrastructure, the characteristics around that. I look at lots of stuff, and the product manager for OnDemand also looks at lots of stuff, and it's just a prioritization exercise. Usually, we already know if something's gone wrong because we've used it ourselves, and so it doesn't even get to production. But yeah, it's a lot of data, and we're just learning to deal with that. It's still, maybe next year I'll be able to tell you exactly what we've done. Thank you very much.